just want to first focus on the budget. You're asking for $383 million. Does that cover both diplomacy and aid? And does that cover all of South Asia or South Asia without Pakistan?
So the $383 million is the assistance budget. It includes the USAID development assistance programs, and it also includes the security assistance programs and other assistance programs managed by the Department of State. It does not include the overall diplomatic operations and engagements that support our diplomatic engagement in the region.
And it does not include Pakistan?
And it does not include Afghanistan and Pakistan.
And how much, excluding Pakistan in this discussion, do we then spend on diplomacy in the area? And I realize that would just be on the embassies in country. Obviously, you don't have a cost accountant going through Foggy Bottom. And
I don't have that number at the top of my head in terms of the breakout specific to the South Asia DNCP component. I'd be happy to get those numbers for you, Mr. Sherman.
We're looking at this bilateral investment treaty. I think it's important that you make sure that it's not just making India safe for offshoring jobs, and that you look not only, because you're going to hear from the companies, and they're going to equate, well, whatever has them make profits, that must be good for America. I hope that you have the economic support to see whether this agreement will lead to jobs. The economic analysis of permanent MFN for China was large trade that would be balanced. Instead, we've seen the American middle class crushed as a result of that bad decision. We certainly don't want to repeat it with regard to India. As to energy, you got 300 million people in India without regular power. There's a natural interest in India in the nuclear power, yet they've failed to attract U.S. suppliers to set up nuclear facilities. What does the U.S. need to do to get India to sign on to the Convention on Supplementary Compensation? And to what extent had the Indians promised to do that or something similar as part of the 123 agreement?
Thank you, Congressman. I think one of the big breakthroughs during the President's visit on Republic Day was the progress made on implementing the 123 agreement, the civil nuclear cooperation. And the breakthroughs were in two key areas. One was on creating the understandings and assurances on tracking fissile material that allow us to move forward and to be in compliance with our requirements with respect to tracking of fissile material. And the second was on this issue of nuclear liability and clarifications from the government of India, from the Prime Minister himself, as well as the Foreign Minister, about the liability for operators as opposed to for suppliers, which is largely in keeping with the Convention on Supplementary Compensation. That articulation by the highest levels of the Indian government about its interpretation of Indian law with respect to how liability accrues is in keeping with the CSC and paves the way now for the Indian Parliament to ratify the CSC, which we hope that they will do in short order. That is something that is largely for the Indian system to take up. We are hopeful that that progress on ratification will be made in the near future.
So the ratification under these circumstances would provide the protection necessary for U.S. companies to operate?
It would provide the assurances of how India sees and accrues liability, in the event of any kind of a happenstance. And so it does, therefore, then guide how companies would see their own liabilities and how the courts would see and determine liability, we believe.
Go on. For the record, if you could give us a timeline about how the South and Central Asia Bureau is being restructured to include Afghanistan and Pakistan, that would be helpful for our record. I want to shift over to Sri Lanka. We've witnessed a democratic change of government there. but parts of and of course the end of the Civil War, but parts of the country have yet to recover, especially the north and eastern regions where the Tamil minority lives. What is the State Department doing to encourage the Sri Lanka to get the Army to leave these occupied lands and to allow displaced persons to return? And what are the efforts, John, that you're making to rebuild the schools and hospitals that were destroyed in the northern and eastern parts of the country?
I will answer briefly and then turn to my colleague as well to chime in on Sri Lanka support prospects and priorities. With respect to the bureaucratic restructuring that you referenced with respect to the South and Central Asia Bureau and the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, this is something that we are looking at very closely. We have always felt and articulated that at the right time we wanted to reintegrate and combine these entities, which were very important at the time while we had an ongoing conflict and a very large and complex operation to manage, to be able to provide that dedicated management focus by creating a special representative's office. I think as we look at transition in Afghanistan, we are looking to see in the near future how we bring that structure into, reintegrate that into the Bureau. So that is something that I think we'll be looking at and moving forward on in the months ahead. With respect to Sri Lanka, I think you're absolutely right to focus on some of the very deep challenges in terms of supporting reconciliation, and that is to address some of these longstanding issues of land. The government has actually set a fairly ambitious 100-day plan and has started down that path, including, I believe, just in the past day or so, there was a announcement in Jaffna by the government, by the Commission on Land that I believe they set up on returning the initial parcels of land. We think that that's a good start, and we know much, much more needs to be done. And the United States has committed that Sri Lanka will not be walking down that path alone, that we're committed to helping them address some of these key issues so that there can be more meaningful reconciliation moving forward. But why don't I turn to John Stivers on.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Sherman, for that question and for your interest in U.S.-Sri Lankan relations and the plight of the Tamil community in northern Sri Lanka. The democratic election in Sri Lanka was really a testament to the Sri Lankan people who changed governments at the ballot box in a nonviolent way in honor of their traditions, their longstanding democratic traditions. Shortly after the election, we sent an interagency assessment team to Sri Lanka to really look at the reform agenda of the government and assess the needs of the Sri Lankan people moving forward. We found strong support for the reform agenda from the government. The government was elected with the support of the minority populations, and we saw that land was an absolute key priority for the people there in Sri Lanka, including accountability, decentralization, and rebuilding of democratic institutions. We hope to support the elections process moving forward, civil society, and the vulnerable communities all over the country and youth. We are looking closely at the assistance package moving forward, both in the short term and the long term. We've briefed a number of your staffs on the findings of the assessment team, and we hope to work with Congress, get your input before decisions are made, and move forward with a bipartisan and Congress and executive branch working together.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms.